5 p.m. so we're pretty much like ready to start final presentation for today, at least in this hall. It's actually good to see like a few people who like still make it here, even it's like the second day of the conference. It's probably like one of like least thankful times for like giving a presentation, because probably half of the audience is already left. But how to say, I believe the better half is still in, so glad to see you here. So my name is Lauri Svan. I come from a company called SC5 Online. You probably haven't heard much about us because we're like a Finnish HTML5 agency. So we don't, okay, we do web pages, but like I would say, okay, we are basically making application like user experience using HTML5 technologies. So most of our approaches are such that we create application like a service for probably like different like mobile browsers, tablets. And then our customer also wants, hey, let's create this on the desktop as well. And at some point they will start asking, hey, can we have it in phone app as well? I myself, I'm working in SC5 as an architect, and when people ask like what an architect does in an HTML5 company, I said that I'm the old and slow man within the company. And I like being old and slow helps a little bit in the role of architect, because if you're old and slow, you need to like advocate for simplicity. And you know, like simple architecture usually is a good thing. So I'm trying to like here also like try to speak a little bit about simplicity. Being an architect also means for me that I get to draw a lot of boxes, and unfortunately today you will be partially victim of that. I also have like art degree pending, but you probably wouldn't want to see any of my drawings, so let's use the boxes instead. So today's topic is about like running server-side backbone, running backbone on the server side. So we in SC5, we actually construct most of our application using Backbone. So this kind of thing, like running stuff on the server, is vital to us. And previously we have been doing like a lot of different kind of hacks for like making this work, but the thing that I'm going to present over here is something that we hope to make a little bit more like longer lasting. Something like spans like across like many different projects. I will be also like showing you a couple of different ways on how to do it, because you probably have heard this idea of like running Backbone servers already maybe at least like 2 times during this conference. So like Spike gave a presentation on how AirBnB does it, and then like Tim Brenian showed how he does it with Backbone LayoutManager. So I'm going to like show a third way and actually compare the alternatives a little bit. So what you're going to see over here is sort of like a meta holy grail presentation. But just to quickly recap the problem for the ones that haven't yet kind of like figured out what it is. So if you have a single page application, you at some point will find out that, oops, it actually fails for the Google bot and probably some like other like browser, some other robots as well. And just like to concretize the thing a little bit more. So I quickly like hacked an application this morning that actually looks ugly, but you will like see that how we can make it like look even like uglier quite quickly. So it is like very like simple Backbone application where you have like master details view type of paradigm. So as I thought, there are like many ways to like understand the holy grail paradigm. It's also like applies like outside the Backbone context. So okay, and there you can see like one, and here you probably see another one. So the point is, okay, this is single page application, so when you're kind of flipping between the pages, kind of like everything basic, like nothing is loaded on the server side, because like data has been either like bootstrapped or like loading as part of loading the first page. And when you can browse like under some JavaScript, everything actually works quite alright. But just like emphasize the problem a little bit, I actually hacked the server that's basically sending you these pages a little bit. So to actually show you kind of what might happen for a robot, I actually like added an extra flag over here. So if you like a robot understands JavaScript, everything is fine. You actually might be able to still pretty much crawl the same pages. And as usually like URL changes correct and all that stuff. But then the problem is that, okay, what if your browser, if your robot doesn't understand JavaScript your way? So I'm momentarily disabling JavaScript just for the sake of getting it right. So then you basically would start crawling something and then let's flag again. And bang. Okay, this is what you get. So if you thought that the application was ugly, okay, I would say like this is like even uglier, and this is how your robot might see it. So quite obviously, you basically would want to do something about this. Just to show you like why it is like this, let's like peek at the source very quickly. So at least in the way how we can create these single-page applications, usually we do it that kind of way that we basically create pretty much the whole document object model on runtime. So basically, okay, when you kind of get the HTML page stub from the server side, this is pretty much what you will get by default. But of course, the idea is that if robots would be crawling it, or even like old browser would be crawling it, this is actually what you should be getting. So basically, somebody else than the robot should actually be doing the dynamic construction of the page for you. And as I mentioned, there are like many ways to do this. So for instance, like previous, we have been doing this a lot in that kind of way. We basically have the double logic. So we have the like logic on the client side, where we really would have the fancy single-page application using Backbone. And then on the server side, we would have something like totally different. But of course, the problem is that, okay, that we double our maintenance work. And our company, we are mainly front-end developers. So we don't want to have like yet another like 50 people for like doing the backend side as well. We basically want to use our front-end skills also on the backend. So that's why we think that like running Backbone on the server side would also be important, at least for us. So we could also like formulate the problem in another way. So if you think about it, okay, robots are only kind of like 0.1% or like 1% or something like very minimal of your like whole traffic to your site. How much do you want to like invest on like architecting your application for them? So for instance, okay, we have customers that for like good reason are asking that, okay, their pages need to be crawlable. And it's quite understandable, especially if they're like media companies, because they basically like live from search engine traffic. But that's like only like one viewpoint of the problem. Another viewpoint is, okay, if you are doing like single-page application, the chances are that you might be able to like craft much better user experience by constructing the single-page application. You don't want to make it like multi-page application that's rendered on the server side. Or like also like what like also like matters, but is quite often neglected, is the developer experience. Okay, we are making the application, especially as a kind of HTML5 agency. We also need to be able to make the application quite fast. We can't just spend infinite amount of resources for creating one project. So we also want that the developer experience itself is good. So we don't want to make things in too many different ways. So instead of kind of making something complex for the robots, we would think, okay, what would be the kind of like minimum set of things that we would need to do for like making it like a good enough way, some kind of like workaround that actually might work well enough for robots and maybe some like legacy browsers as well. So we would think that it could be something like this. So I would say like enter like early 2000 again. So that was like the time when this conversion between the analog TV sets to digital TV sets was happening, and at least in the Finnish like TV world, like this there was some kind of enforcement of like moving to like digital television sets by a certain date. So that basically opened like whole new market for a different kind of set of boxes that would be converting the analog signal into, converting like digital signal into analog one. And I said, okay, we should be constructing a little bit the same kind of box for the legacy browsers. So it would be basically the box that would be kind of like reading your like good old, this like fancy new kind of like digital signal, your like server API that is sending you a JSON or something like that, in such kind of format that it can either like send it as is to your browser, as in like, okay, you will get full app, the full experience. Or like alternatively, okay, if you are a browser that doesn't understand JavaScript, or if you are a robot, some of the like magical box will crunch you all that stuff in plain HTML. So we're basically creating like that kind of magical box over here. So what else would we gain by creating such kind of magical box? So yeah, I mentioned the like robot problem already, and the like legacy browser problem, but there might be some like additional gains. So you have been hearing these talks about kind of speeding up your web page load and starting the first render of the page. So if you can basically send the first page in your single page application kind of in its full glory without like loading any extra JavaScripts or without like making any API calls, of course it will display faster in your browser. So if you crunch it first in the server side, then send to the client side, you actually might be like saving some precious like rendering time. And also another point, actually I haven't like investigated this that thoroughly because I'm not a testing expert, but I do foresee, okay, if you're able to kind of execute the same application on your server-side stack, that also might help in your unit testing, because you might be able to, depending on your test, you might be able to first like create a mock object of your API side, like send you like a dummy data to your application, or like alternatively you could do the same thing. You have like mock application, you would be sending stuff back to your API, and at least that basically means, okay, you wouldn't necessarily need to have like totally different methods for testing the browser and testing yourself. So, as I mentioned, there are like many ways to do it, but I believe that pretty much each and one of them would build on these same principles. And this doesn't only apply for Backbone application, it also should apply for pretty much every browser application that is a single page application. So, of course, if you want to execute the application on your server side, yeah, you need to be able to execute JavaScript. And you know, we have like Node.js for that kind of purposes. It works quite well, but the problem doesn't end there. Because you know, like Node.js it has like different set of API from the one that browsers have. So you basically need to somehow add those libraries that you are using on the client side to also be usable on your server side. And for that kind of purposes, you would need a module loader. How many of you are aware of this, like either like required.js or common.js modules? So pretty much everybody, so I don't need to explain what a module is. So that's a good thing. And pretty much I believe like either one could work all right. In my example, I'm using required.js, but if you hear the Spice presentation on how AirBnB does it, they're using common.js modules. Either way can work quite all right. Okay, in addition to your JavaScript libraries, your application quite likely depends on document object model. So basically, you're doing some manipulation of the DOM on the client side. If you're going to like run your application on the server side, probably the server would need to be able to execute the same code that does the DOM manipulation. And you will need some kind of workaround for that. And you need quite good workaround because you can't just like stub it out, because you need to get the same kind of results that your client would do in its own end. But it doesn't end on the like document object model, because you also have like a whole lot of other browser APIs. So applications like increasingly using offline support. So you might need some support for local storage or IndexedDB or whatever, or at least you would need to be able to stub it out somehow. Then, okay, your application is quite likely making some XML HTTP request calls to your API server. Well, okay, if your like API server like lives in the same box as your server implementation is, then you might not might not need an external HTTP request on your server side, but at least if you're like making some like external API calls from your application, you would need some like XHR on the server as well. And then, like last but not least, you would also need some way to tell your application has completed rendering. This is actually a little bit difficult thing to explain because it's like at the same time quite obvious and at the same time actually quite, how to say, thing that you don't normally like need to care about. So if you like momentarily think about how your like single page application works, it most likely first like loads the HTML page, then you start making some calls to the backend for loading some data. Once it has the data, then it basically starts like creating you document object model elements, and as a result you will get the web page into like full glory. But how does the crawler know when your page has really completed rendering? And it's also the same problem on the server side. Like nobody else in the application really knows that okay, when it's really idle, when it's not doing anything anymore. So we need some kind of way for like messaging between the application and then the server that will be running it. That hey, now I am completed. Now you can actually send stuff back to the server. It's a little bit like a complex topic, but I actually will get back to that. So there are like many ways to do it, and as you know, there are like many kind of ways for understanding the whole Grail itself. I just actually did like very quick Googling what we would get from the image search. And you pretty much see that okay, there are like many different ways on what the whole Grail looks like, but they actually do have some like a common feature. It is some kind of like bowl-like shape, and okay, it might be quite crude or quite fancy, but of course in some cases it's actually, the more that you like peek into it, you will start seeing that actually the idea of like whole Grail actually can get quite quirky. I actually don't want to go like all 10, but okay, if you like browse it like long enough, you start getting like things like this. I'm not sure if it's just like California or does the Google know like too much about me. I'm pretty sure that I never like Googled that. But yeah, you have like the same kind of things on the server side as well. But just like a, how to say, like box drawing hours, like for like following 5 slides you will get to see a lot of boxes. How many of you like know the concept like layer architecture? How many of you have like used for like learning layered stacks? Okay, quite many of you. But just explain you very quickly. So like idea of layers pretty much is that okay, like upper layer itself can like call layers like directly beneath it, but it actually doesn't like cross over the layer for asking somebody else. So for instance, in this picture, you can see the application logic itself. Okay, it may be like, it might be doing calls to Backbone, it might be doing calls to jQuery, it might be doing calls directly to the browser API, but not to the layer below, because actually the browser API like complete hides on like what kind of like is below it. And it's actually quite a nice principle if you really use the layer for really kind of shielding the stuff below the layer itself, because it also means that okay, here you actually could like replace the JavaScript runtime into something else, and your application would need to know about that. But if you have a kind of like typical Backbone application, it like usually looks like this. It's not actually very layered. You're calling Backbone, you're calling jQuery, you're calling the browser directly, and that means that on the server side, you will basically need to kind of do some kind of workarounds for each and one of them, because none of them like runs as is on the server. So for the like following the slides, I made just like small like reading hint. So if you like see something green over here, it pretty much means okay, that is something that you can fully reuse. But if you see something blue, that means okay, there's like workaround needed on that part. And if you see something red, that pretty much means okay, sort of like platform space that you probably don't need to care about that. So actually, this is the first like possible solution. It's not about layers, but like again kind of about boxes. So the idea is that okay, instead of like running your application on your server, instead of okay, maybe you could put the browser to run on the server side. And with the browser here I mean okay, you really have like full browser. So kind of like one example for like doing this kind of stuff is a library called Phantom.js. So Phantom.js is like a Qt application that is using Qt WebKit. It has a command-line interface that you can use for instance crawling some web page, but it also has a kind of like console interface by which you would like ask it for instance like running some JavaScript, and you could like well construct a kind of like proxy browser for kind of doing the kind of crawling on the server side and maybe then kind of sending it back to the server. But the problem is that by default Phantom.js doesn't have any kind of like server-side capabilities of its own. So the ways how I know that this can be utilized with Phantom.js is that okay, you have like another process, say that would be a Node.js server, and then you have like Phantom.js as another process, and okay, some like request comes to your server, then the server actually kind of like sends a message to Phantom.js. Phantom.js does the crawling, gets kind of document object model back, serializes that into HTML, and then like sends that back to your other process. But the problem is that this like inter-process communication might be quite difficult. You might be using something like XML sockets for that kind of purpose, but it can get quite tricky. But the basic principle is still quite simple. From a browser viewpoint, it just like hits some proxy over here. If it's a smart browser, it will get a normal application. If it's a dumb browser, a robot, it will get Phantom.js. I would say that I think like this kind of approach is something that is actually quite solid, but not maybe done with Phantom.js. I would say that okay, somebody at some point will do this with Chrome Memory Framework and Node.js, because after all they both run V8 engine, and they actually could be, how do I say, bundled together quite easily as a single process. And then you basically would have like full browser implementation and full service stack implementation running on the same process, and you would be able to do quite a lot of fancy stuff with that. I think that will work, but it's probably not scalable in the sense that okay, you might be able to handle, say, maybe a few different crawlers at the same time, but definitely not kind of serving all your Internet Explorer 7 users or some like other like legacy browsers. But okay, let's get back to the boxes. So this is the typical way how we have done it in the past. So you basically have like shared templates. So you basically have some kind of like logic-free template language like Mustache, and you will basically be feeding stuff to Mustache either from your single page application or from your server. And you will basically have some kind of like glue code layer over there where you actually mash up the stuff, mash up your like data for your template engine. But the problem with this approach is that, as you see, you're not actually sharing much. You end up doing the double work. The end user won't like see a difference between the server and the client, but as a developer of the application, you will see the difference. Your project will probably get kind of like twice as slow as it could be. Okay, maybe we actually kind of like give up all this kind of document object model stuff, and we basically like set like bar a little bit higher. So we basically use some kind of more like holistic framework like AirBnB or Meteor, and I must say I'm not an expert on like either of the frameworks, but as far as I understand how they work is okay, they basically hide this whole document object model thing. You basically will do like templating, and templates are something that will run both on the server and on the client, and they have an API that will be compatible, so basically the same calls work both on the browser and both on your Node.js server. And it probably will work quite alright if you are constructing your application from scratch. But for instance, in our cases, our customer quite often has their like own backend running. They wouldn't want to put yet another server calling their servers for kind of doing things in a totally different way. So it's basically, how to say, if you basically take one of these frameworks, you take, how to say, both the client implementation and the server implementation. There's no kind of like other way to have it. So you basically will also have like log in to their ways of doing things. Okay, then the obvious way. So okay, let's say that we will have a like full DOM implementation on the server side. So this actually looks quite a lot what your application might look like. So you have the same application logic, you will have exact the same backbone, exact jQuery, but for the browser API, at least for the document object model part, that would be something that would be implemented differently on your browser and on the server. And I think like JS DOM works quite alright as far as you're only doing the DOM thing. But you know, like browser APIs don't end in the document object model. There are like a whole lot of like other like APIs. So you would need some workaround for those as well. Then the other problem is that okay, if you really are running a full document object model implementation on your server side, it actually will be quite slow and probably will be quite like heavy on memory consumption. So you might not want to do that. So what you do is that, okay, you might like raise your bar a little bit higher. So you think that okay, you don't need the document object model because you will be accessing through jQuery anyway. So you will end up like emulating jQuery on the server side. And there's a project and like ready-made library for that. That's called Cheerio. Cheerio itself is not a full jQuery implementation. It is a partial implementation. It has like implemented most of the important jQuery functions for modifying your DOM, but it doesn't have some fancy things like jQuery Ajax implementation, or it actually doesn't have even some like normal ones like okay, handling events. Because the use case for Cheerio was that okay, it would be basically, how to say, it would be just kind of like common way for you for like dealing with DOM on the server side. But basically there are like workarounds for this because you can actually implement the like missing parts by yourself if you really need them on the server. But the good thing about this stuff is that okay, at least this Cheerio claims to be was like 6 times or like 8 times as fast as JS DOM. So it actually might be quite enough on your server-side implementation. Okay, more boxes. So this is the way that I understood that the AirBnB guys have it. So basically, okay, they have their like, own application, and they have Backbone running, but actually in addition to Backbone, they actually have quite a lot of their own conventions. The adaptation layer that I'm like depicting over here, it actually might be quite thin, because what it does on the client side is okay, it does like DOM manipulation for the browser, and then for the server it actually concatenates those templates. But what you see in this picture is jQuery, for instance, it is missing at the moment. So basically this is for rendering templates and templates only. You can't use the tools that you are normally used to. So if you have a third-party JavaScript library that uses jQuery, I understood that okay, in this case it wouldn't work. If you have say some kind of Backbone extension, you probably wouldn't be able to use the extension without some modifications, because also this way also like expects you to use Backbone in some like very certain way. And in my own personal opinion, this actually might work quite alright if you're like ready to kind of create your application from scratch and ready to like learn new ways. But at least for like a person like me, I'm like quite used to like writing Backbone applications in like finding a Backbone way, and quite used to like writing applications using jQuery. So I don't personally see this as an option for me, at least not the best one. So let's quickly put the boxes together so that we can see the difference. So you have like normal application, you will basically do a little bit of adaptation for both ends everywhere. Then okay, if you kind of like have this custom framework of yours, yeah, some adaptation on browser, some adaptation on the server. If you're doing the templates, you have like a full stack on the both ends. If you're like abstracting out that document object model, okay, then you will have your application-specific conventions and some backbone conventions that might work all right. For JS DOM, yeah, it actually can be pretty much vanilla application, but it will be slow. Therefore, Cheerio, yeah, you have the jQuery and that is your abstraction layer. So it's basically like a question like where you want to put your abstraction layer. In our case, in our company, the problem is like we are like all adopted that don't do any tricks. So we are used to like vanilla backbone way, and the ones that are not used to vanilla backbone way, they're using like frameworks on top of backbone. They're using, for instance, like Tim Brennian's like Backbone LayoutManager, or they are using marionettes or something like that. So we need a framework that actually would like build on top of Backbone API and that would be compatible with Backbone API. We would need a framework where we could actually use jQuery pretty much the way that jQuery is intended to be used. So that's why we started crafting something like this. So we thought, okay, on the server side, we don't need to fully emulate the browser. It's okay that, okay, we're just going to stop out some browser functionalities. If I want to like draw an example, so the browser might have support for some kind of like fancy touch events. I believe that our like robot won't be sending us back any touch event on the server side, so we don't need to emulate that. And also, okay, we can't expect that people will start using our framework. So we know that, okay, there are now like 3 different Holy Grail frameworks out, and either like 2 of them are like somewhat opinionated on how things should be done. We don't want to tell how things should be done. We hope that, okay, you will be able to use our framework in your way. And also we thought, okay, the best way how we could actually like live up to that promise is, okay, we try to basically maintain the API compatibility. So we basically, if we basically make some changes to the backbone, we basically like make sure that, okay, you still can use the backbone in the same way as the backbone API is telling you to use it, like nothing extra. The same thing with jQuery. So if we basically like need to kind of like tinker with jQuery, make our own modifications, it still needs to be called the jQuery way. So we basically try to like keep the API compatibility. So what that means that in the end, we are not constructing a framework. I would say that, okay, we are not even constructing a library. I think we are constructing service of polyfills. So I think like currently it looks something like this. So I think like this is pretty much kind of like quite like honest way to put on like where we actually need to make some modifications. So we believe that applications can stay pretty much as they are, but on the backbone we need to like implement a couple of small changes. I will quickly go through what they are. On the jQuery side, okay, we know that we use like Cheerio instead of jQuery, so it's not a full jQuery. We need to like have a couple of like additions there as well. Nothing big. And then we know that, okay, if you have third-party libraries that access document object model directly or access some fancy API from your browser, you most likely need to make some stubs for those on the server side. But the nice thing is that, okay, instead of like changing the application, let's like change the layers underneath, and it can work quite all right. So. But there are a couple of things that you may need to change in your application. So if you're using jQuery in a very fancy way, you may need to like modify your application for sticking to Cheerio subset. If you don't yet use a dependency manager like require.js or like common.js modules that you how to say like package together using Browserify or something like that.
I think it's jQuery common.js.
Sorry?
I think they use jQuery common.js.
There's no, I know that, okay, you can say like npm install jQuery,
yes,
and what you will get is a jQuery that's like running on top of JS DOM.
Yes. Oh, you cannot use JS DOM.
Yeah, we aren't using JS DOM, but we're using Cheerio. But the point is, you could actually like pretty much like do the same thing by like replacing Cheerio with JS DOM, and then you might be able to use the full jQuery. And actually, I think it actually might be quite a minor modification. Yeah, but what will be a bigger modification in your application if you don't yet have a dependency manager? You will need to like start using one, because otherwise you probably won't be able to get your like client-side libraries running on the server. And then you need to like implement some messaging mechanism. Yeah, so for the backbone, like modifications are actually quite small. So for all the like normal classes that you would be using, models, views, or collections, or even your router, those will stay as is. But then some like other like dependencies under the hood, those we're changing. So we're actually making like full replacement of the history API, because the history API depends on the DOM. On the server side, you can pretty much stop out most of the stuff. And then for the backbone Ajax, we did a small changes over there. So we're not using the jQuery Ajax directly, but our own replacement. But then let's get back to this problem of like knowing on, or how there's like messaging between your application and your server. So if you start like reading this activity diagram from the top, from the like black circle in the upper left-hand corner, is basically when a request arrives to your server, you will be doing pretty much normal stuff. Okay, you get the like request. You will actually parse the path that the request like came to. So that would be something like /items/1. You will pass that. You will pass that to your router. The router will do its own magic. On typical backbone application, what it might be doing, that it like triggers some model loading. The model actually will be calling a server for kind of like fetching the corresponding data. Okay, the data comes back. The model like notifies your views that hey, actually now we have like new data. Go render yourself. And okay, the view like renders itself. But what it needs to do is like it needs to like notify somebody that hey, now the view was changed, so that we at some point will know that which views have changed and when all the views have changed, so that we can send stuff back for the server. There are like many ways for doing this. This is actually just like one example of how we did it. And I believe the main point in this one is that we need some kind of single point of control that knows when all the views are ready to be sent back. Because otherwise we might be sending something partial back to the server, back to the client. But the good point is like if you see like this green box over there, and that is your backbone application. It can be exactly the same application on both ends. So it's quite obvious that okay, you will need some kind of like helpers when you're kind of configuring your application on the server side or on the client side, because you may need to be able to switch between Cheerio or switch for the jQuery. You may need to kind of like load those fancy browser-specific libraries, like some kind of like touch library, and instead of like using the touch library, you may need to kind of like use some kind of stub in your server-side implementation. So you need some kind of feature detection. I think like Tim Brainian already demoed his like forthcoming approach for doing this. We also will be using that one eventually. But I think like now it would be demo time. So who wants to see how it functions under the hood? Okay, like many enough to show it. So, okay, I must say I'm like former Eclipse guy, because I've been like working like building Eclipse plugin for half of my career. So this is not a Sublime editor, but you probably still will be able to read it quite alright. So let's actually first like peek it through the like normal console. Is the console font itself is like readable? Yeah, I believe you will be able to see it. So let's like see actually what happens when like a request comes, because I have like the console logging over here. So I will first squeeze change that into a little bit like smaller space. And then for the URL, okay, let's like first run it in like very normal way. So, and actually like, let's have like a little bit of okay, this one. So we are sending the request. We can like pretty much like read from here like what happens. So when we're going to bootstrap the application, we actually already kind of started running the application partially. We basically initialized a couple of views that we had, the master view and the details view. We initialized the router. And at some point, like, okay, the application like told it's like fully initialized. Okay, then the like request came, and we basically triggered the router. The router actually like did like a little bit like state management for itself. It basically said, okay, now it's actually pending for request. It actually started like reading something from our like Backbone collection, and actually what to collect, and then yeah, this is actually something that happens when you basically like trigger to like request from the client side. Sorry, from the server side. So as I thought, like we are like making currently like the XML HTTP request on the server side. So actually the server got like another request over here for like serving the API call. The API call completed, and okay, as a result, the collection itself is now done. So the view heard that the collection got changed. So it like rendered itself, and then it told that, hey, I'm done. Okay, the details view rendered itself, and then it told that it's done. And the same thing, and okay, the router is like listening for both the details view and the master view. And now that it knew that the both views are done, then actually the router also like told it is done. And then the server actually can send like response back, and we got like 200 okay. The funny thing is that, okay, in the current example, we are getting like very same look on the client side because we are running exactly the same application. So if you peek into the console, where is my console? Here we go.
JavaScript off?
Ah, did I leave it off? Correct. Yeah, it's actually also like a good demo that yes, this actually can run run without JavaScript as well. Okay, and you got the same magic, so it is the same application. So to like very quickly show you like what you have under the hood is that you have a pretty much like plain old like Backbone application. You have a couple of views, you have your collection. Okay, we have the third-party libraries. I'm using Bower for dependency, or sort of like for like fetching the components, and require.js for like loading those on both ends. Let's see what happens on the server side. How many of you know Node.js? Quite many. That's good because then you actually will be able to follow this quite fine. I'm actually kind of like wrapping these inside require.js, so that's why you see this little bit of extra boilerplate over here. But basically I have like 200 for the rules. So everything going to /API /something that basically goes to our API service. And our like API service is like very, very small. We basically send like a snippet of JSON back to the client. And then for the application emulation, like everything that goes kind of with an empty URL, like only the slash, or like even like empty string, they will go to this route. Or if it has something like /item/1, they get over here. So, okay, here's like a robot demo. It's not actually relevant for the example itself. I could actually remove that. But then like real work starts. We are first like passing the path. Then basically, okay, I have like a little bit like of caching over here. If we actually have like rendered exactly the same stuff before, we're just like sending it back. Nothing interesting over there. And then the actual beef itself. Or actually, let's not get into this one yet. Let's first get to this one. So the point is, okay, you have a path, you are sending that to your Backbone application, and then your like Backbone application starts to work. But we also like need to attach like a small handler for Backbone, for a Backbone router to tell it, okay, call me when you are done. And basically what we are like doing over here is that, okay, if it tells us that, okay, we're done with some error, then we just need to report the client, sorry, we failed. If it succeeded, all right. So basically now we are assume that, okay, there's like working DOM on your server side. Then we just like serialize the DOM into plain HTML and send it back as text. So the heart of the application is currently the router, but it could be anywhere. So you basically create your own like application singleton. The framework doesn't care on like what is your like single point of control that like does the messaging between your server-side implementation and your like application running on the server. But you just need to have like one point of control. But I just like want to show that, okay, it's possible to actually attach into your server. So it's like plain old router. You have a couple of routes, and basically actually both of them like lead to your item function. And the item function is like nothing magical. So what you have over here is that it's just like a pass a little bit of information for your like details view, just to know like what item you're rendering. And then you have this state management that we needed to inject. But okay, if you have like a model that's like, collection that's like loaded, then you can like render your page. If you don't, then you fetch that and something magic starts to happen. But really it's like no special magic. I think if we get to like magic parts, I think it happens in this like required.js configuration that we are using. It is a pretty normal required.js configuration. You have your own kind of like parts, a couple of shims, but here we need to do a little bit of conditional loading. In case you're like doing stuff on the browser side, you're using like a jQuery as normal, but if you're like doing it on the server side, we somehow need to pass a Cheerio for your application. Otherwise, like pretty normal stuff. So you can basically like run the same required.js configuration on both ends. And with this like small pieces, you can get like pretty well working Backbone application runs to both ends.
Is this code available on
Yeah.
GitHub? Okay.
And that actually like basically takes me to the next slide. So yes, it is available on GitHub. So I just like submit to the GitHub repo. It can be found from a place like this, SC5/Backbone server side. And then if I was like mumbling too much, there's also like an article in the Mozilla Hacks that I wrote just like yesterday. And it pretty much explains the same stuff with maybe a little bit more detail. So you may want to check that out as well. And of course, yeah, this project is public on GitHub. It's not complete, but I would hope that together we could make it complete. It already probably like serves as a good demonstration that this kind of thing can be done, and probably work can be continued from this onwards. So let's complete that together. I think we might have a minute or two for questions. So there goes the first one.
I saw that you're using Express in Node. Is
Correct.
there any conflict or any special management that you have to do between the Express routes and the Backbone routes?
Yeah, actually the magic that we have over there is just that we have this couple of Express routes of our own, like here. It's just like regular expressions, it's a little bit hard to read, but basically, okay, you have kind of your some routes. Actually, the Backbone doesn't care like which route it is, but basically you just kind of like have some like express route, and it's like pass the part of the request and like send it to Backbone as is. So actually, the Backbone doesn't care that much about your express routes.
So I've seen like all three like holy grail examples so far, and it seems like most of the problems come from these JavaScript MVC frameworks that interact with the DOM. Do you know of any MVC frameworks that don't interact with the DOM that you could use in this?
Let's see. Well, okay, I believe that, okay, if you end up like how to say, in the end you need like interact with DOM if you basically want to like do any modification on the browser side. But some more like holistic frameworks like Derby, they can fully like abstract it out. But when it comes to like MVC frameworks themselves, I believe they're like pretty dependent on DOM. I believe like how to say, like Backbone. Like one of the reasons why we chose like Backbone for this kind of thing is that actually it's like one of the like least opinionated frameworks about the DOM itself. It doesn't have that many DOM dependencies. But if you do that thing with the framework like Angular, you actually might have like more problem because it actually uses like more like bells and whistles of the DOM. It's like a nice framework, but actually quite hard to run on the services, I believe.
Sorry, I have one more question. Since you're using Node, and it's running on like a single thread, do you have to, how do you get rid of all your objects after each response is sent? Like,
yeah, actually that's like one of my to-do lists. So the problem is that if you currently like, would have like a lot of like concurrency on your server, we are currently like sharing the same, I think like we are actually sharing the same DOM instance even for all the concurrent requests. I know it's like a bad thing and it shouldn't be done, but it's like on the to-do list to be solved. So basically you probably would need to like make a copy of the kind of basic, how to say, like the DOM that is not modified for every request, and then start like building on top of that.
Wouldn't a better solution be forking out a process, have that particular worker, like round it out if it's an old browser or something, have that guy do, you know what I'm saying, have different workers do different things.
I'm not sure if I fully understand, but please elaborate a little more.
Would you ever like dedicate a particular worker from this? Would you ever dedicate a worker just to do this part particularly, and everything else for the particular API use something else?
Yes, that would make a lot of sense. So basically, okay, that could be done for it like by kind of like having better, for example, reverse proxy in the front, and like okay, for like all the robots that can recognize it will be guiding this direction, and for all the rest it will be guiding somewhere else. And I think that is something that must be done because this probably can't like currently take a traffic of say like 1,000 requests per second. No way. So you only want to be using this on some select cases. Okay. Any other questions? These are good ones.
Yeah.
Okay. If not, I believe we're done with the presentation. So just in case that you got like any other questions that could pop up in your mind, you can like either like reach me on Twitter for like some like other stuff that I'm doing. Check from my GitHub, and I'm done. Thanks for your patience.